we're going to have one of our students introduce you.
Hey, I'm Bella. I don't know if I said that before. And thank you for coming. This is Kimberly Richmond. Kimberly was born in Lima, Peru, and migrated to the United States at the age of 7. She is bilingual, first-generation Peruvian student in the Counselor Education and Counseling Psychology Master's Program at the University of Connecticut. She received her undergraduate degree in International Studies with a concentration in Latin America at Central Connecticut State University back in 2018. Kimberly currently works as a college access advisor for the nonprofit organization, the Hartford Consortium for Higher Education. So please join me in welcoming Kimberly Richmond.
Hi. Thank you. Oh, it's very nice to actually be invited back to come to CCSU to give like a little Talking Tuesday, part of Talking Tuesday, and it's nice to see how big the program's grown since I left campus. Really great.
What year were you here?
I was here from 2014 to 2018. It feels forever ago. Yeah, can't believe it's gonna be. Sorry, college. Yeah, it's weird. And I work currently at a high school in Hartford. So the kids that I work with, the students, they always keep it in mind, like, oh, Liz, you're old now, so I never forget now.
They'll humble you.
Yeah, for real, they will. But so as you mentioned, I did come here when I was 7. I came with my older sister and my older brother, so I'm the youngest of 3. It's interesting coming at that age while my siblings already were at a different stage of their life. I think for me, it was like affected just how growing up in a whole different environment and kind of just seeing the drastic difference between the two of living in Peru and then coming here, and then mentally having to grow up a lot faster than I should have at my age. And I think it's very common for immigrant students or immigrant children to experience that same thing. So I think for me, even just coming here and seeing more people of different races and different colors, and and just being at 7 years old and not being familiar with how to ask the right questions or who to refer to, and just kind of having to navigate through that area. And unfortunately, it's nothing bad, but my brother and sister, they were a lot older, so they were dealing with their own things, so I had to navigate that on my own. And there's no perfect guideline as to how to go through that phase. But here I am now. I think I mentioned this at the beginning, and it wasn't until I was in middle school time frame where I noticed that I was having some self-identity crisis, and I think it was because I wanted to fit in so much. And even just from when I came here and I was in my 2nd grade class, not many students even knew where Peru was. And now I feel like there's so many more Peruvian students I'm always encountering all the time, that back then in my individual ESL class that I was in, it was majority Puerto Rican students. And so I would either get oh, you're from China, or oh, you're from Mexico. And then at that point, I don't think it bothered me. And you know how some people feel. And then I didn't. It was more frustration. How do you know what Peru is? It was more of that rather than frustration when it came to race. And so, but I didn't actually start having my identity issues back until I was in middle school. And for there, I think I just did it my way and try to assimilate, so hanging out with more people, trying to embrace speaking Spanish and whatnot. At home, Spanish all the time. That's my first language, and that's how I communicate with my parents, especially with my dad, because that's still his main language. He knows a few words in English here and there when he uses it in conversation. But that's how I communicate with my grandma, with everybody else. And so when I was in middle school, just going through that phase of actually even embracing my stepfather. He's from Puerto Rico. So just because he was like a second dad to me. He always take me around, and I was very involved with his family, especially earlier on. And I think I just started to embrace more like, oh yeah, I'm Puerto Rican too, because it felt more like people connected to that because they knew what Puerto Rico was, and it felt like they were like, oh okay, then like you're in, you're considered one of us, and I gravitated towards that because it felt like a sense of acceptance, belonging, fitting in, and for at that time period, I didn't really I was okay with that because I felt safe. It wasn't until you go into college and you're exposed to a bunch of other students, and they start being happy with who they are and embracing the diversity and understanding that then that's when I started coming out of my shell more and doing the things that I did in private at home, but more publicly, and being okay with it. And I think for me, it was a big eye opening for me as just going through that to not to see it in my college years, to then actually realize all the different stuff that I went through and understanding that it's not necessarily I was embarrassed. It's just I didn't know how to deal with acculturation or assimilation. And there isn't a perfect way to navigate it. I mean, now I know if I talked to myself back when, I would probably say, well, maybe I should be okay and navigate and say a little more things and teach people about Peru and for them to know about me and know that I'm different. But I was more comfortable then.
I say, because with my parents, my mom came here early 2000.
Mhm.
I grew up in Brazil, but she came 20 years ago. So when I came in 2013, end of 2013, and things were a little different from when she came. She came in 2002.
Yeah.
I think. So the thing with her, even to this day, her and my dad, my little brother, he was born here, so he's 10 years old. They are very okay, we speak Portuguese in the house, but when we go outside, let's not talk in Portuguese because we don't want people to give us a dirty look. Because back then, when they first got here, my mom always said that going to the grocery store or going anywhere, you couldn't speak any language but English. So you always kept your mouth shut and she say, viver na sombra, which is kind of live in the shadow. And she still have that mentality. So when you were talking about that, when I first got here, I struggle with that. I still struggle a little bit because it's hard to grow out of that. You have to be quiet. You can't stand out because you never know what's gonna happen. You start hiding your identity a little bit. So when you were talking about that, I was thinking about my family and my mom and how she sees the United States, which is different for me now because being here and be at the LACC with my coworkers, I'm kind of learning the culture, my culture, and appreciate my culture and their culture too. So it's kind of it's fun. You're learning more and you're learning more about yourself. So
Exactly, and I think college definitely brought that experience out of me. Had I not gone to college, I don't know exactly how my mentality. I feel like I've grown up, and even my ideology now has changed a lot, even from my family too. And it probably is the fact that I'm a master's student too in school counseling because that's what I want to do. It has definitely opened my mind more and being receptive of how I communicate and how I refer and trying to break away from that ideology that I grew up with as far as with the LGBTQ plus community, because as you know, it's not very well accepted or just with weed, it's terrible, you can't grow up around that, and you start kind of breaking away from that stigma. So I'm very thankful I went to college for sure.
I think it's also great that you're doing a psych major and going into counseling because I've always heard that there's not enough diversity in counseling or therapy in general, where a lot of people this sounded better in my head. It's just nice to talk to someone that would look like them or come from the same place. Same thing with teachers. There's sometimes there isn't certain areas a lot of diversity for teachers. I just think it's great that you're in that field and you can bring that diversity.
I think So I work at the high school now, and I think being there and being a resident at the same time has benefited me so much because what I'm learning in school right now and the theories that I'm learning, I can actually apply to my current students. And sometimes the students that I'm currently working with, they don't have that person to cheer them on or to encourage them or to see the potential that other people, can see in us that we may not recognize, seeing their full potential and allowing them to reach that and without like breaking down their ideas and breaking down that like, hey, you could do more than what's expected as of right now. There's more out there in the world. So.
I think that's wonderful. I struggled a lot during high school because I didn't have that support. And you were part of the ELL program, like the English learning program too.
So I was in. So when I started, I moved here. I wasn't in Britain. I was in the ELL program my second, third grade, and half of fourth grade, and then I ended up moving to Bristol. So in Bristol at that time, I didn't need the ELL support, but at the same time, there wasn't enough diversity in the school that I felt fully comfortable in. Because I recognized, I felt that I was different. So for that reason, I didn't want to stick out more than I already did.
See, that's the thing. When one of my teachers from high school came here for Talking Tuesday too, that's one thing that the kids in the EL program struggle with is like they feel like they are not accepted in the classroom. Like they are not like those students because they don't know English, so they feel like they are different. So they always like keep in this little room where you like everyone in the room speak the same language you or like something similar. And kind of they kept us away from the classroom experience with the teachers and all that. We had like one teacher that would like come and translate everything. And a lot of like what I see a lot with the Brazilian community is that they don't think they can do much here besides like working in construction or do house cleaning, like earning money. They don't see themselves doing better because most of the time, like my brother, he always struggle with like, oh, my teachers don't expect anything from me. Like they send me in your room, we do the paper, like they translate the paper, they give us the answer and we return and then like grade it. So it's like the teachers, the staff didn't even believe in them. So like them as kids, they couldn't believe in themselves too. So when Bella was talking about that, it's kind of like, yeah, because if I didn't have one teacher, I was like, oh, you can do it, you can do it. I wouldn't have made it to college. And I see all my friends in high school that were with me and didn't even finish high school. They end up going to work. It's just like upsetting. And when you talked about it, I was like, oh, yeah, that's a great point.
There's a couple of things I want to point out. So like what you mentioned, with like getting the support and like being comfortable and getting used to the new environments. Or for example, for me, growing up in like 5th grade, I had 2 best friends who I was talking to and like I would hang out with them all the time, right? Parents very strict, by the way, so I couldn't really do much. But just from speaking with them, I picked up on how to say certain ways. And like me, in comparison to my siblings, my accent is lesser than. I feel like I still hear it. But in comparison to my siblings, like I'm well spoken and with the less accent that you can't really project, that you can't really like pick up on. But I remember like during that phase, I would say the way Peru, my friend would say it, and she's Peru, and then I would get made fun of at home because it was like, oh, look at you, you're saying it so American, like, oh, what's wrong with you? Like, I don't know. So then it's like eventually, slowly but surely, like I didn't even think much of it, but as I start reflecting on my own life, like there's different times in my life where even from my own family, I felt like I wasn't part of them, but then I wasn't part of here either, because like I'm not fully American, but I'm not fully Peruvian. And then even when we would go back to visit Peru, it's like, oh, I can hear your accent. You're not from here. Like, like where are you from? Like, I was like, well, I was born here. It's like, oh, but it doesn't sound right. So it's like you start seeing the differences rather than pointing out the similarities between each other. It's more of the difference are being drawn out.
It's interesting you say that because I was just having that conversation with my mom and my aunt on Sunday. How, well, I'm not like Hispanic or Latino, but I feel like this like my parents are immigrants, but I was born here, and you know, I don't have accent when I speak my language, and although some people who were born here, they still have a better accent than I do, but our community also likes to point out that, oh, like you sound American, or when I'm talking to someone at my church who is an immigrant, they're like, they say like, they point out like, oh, I could tell you're born here. Well, yeah, but you also know my whole life. So it's very like, I feel like this happens with a lot of different communities. They like to point that out, and it just, it kind of just, I was telling my mom, it just always like brought me down because it's like you mostly grew up here, having a self-identity crisis. I just wish we could all just each other out.
In an ideal world, that would be nice.
I know.
But our family always makes it harder on us.
Yeah.
What's a good way to help students? Because my daughter, and she's going through this, you know, to help students embrace that difference instead of feeling left out or feeling like they don't belong or
I think
excluded
it
or
might be like subliminal messages. Like for example, maybe even within our own culture, like we don't point it out like with our own people, but like whenever, like for example, it's very common within our Hispanic community for them to say, for a person of Asian background, to just call everyone Chino, to call everyone Chinese, just regardless whether they're like from South Korea or whatever. And like sometimes it just happens so natural that like moms and parents or people in our family, they still just say it. So rather than letting it slide even within our own family, actually pointing it out and bringing attention to it, but definitely not in an attacking way, because that's not going to go anywhere.
yeah.
So I think just bringing out and fighting it, but in a calm
Peaceful
manner,
way.
peaceful way, and just like educating them. And then maybe the first time they may not agree to it, but maybe by the second or third time that you actually bring it out, maybe it'll make a more conscious decision to, rather saying Chino, they'll say Asiático. I think if we start working like in that direction, maybe that'll bring self-reflection to the individual. Like, okay, well, each race or each community deserves their own respect. And just as people, sometimes people get offended, like if you call someone Mexican but they're Puerto Rican, they're like, oh my gosh, like blasphemy. You know, it's like the craziest thing in the whole world, but really, it really isn't. It's just, I think it's more like the mentality that we grew up in. It's like it's all that, the patriotic pride that we have for our own nation, that we're like, oh no, like my race is better or whatever, you know. And it's so hard to combat that because it's just like, we're talking about like generations for like forever, and that's just so engraved in our minds that I think we actively need to be fighting it and discussing it and disputing it in order for us to actually even see a difference in change. It's hard. But I think like being specifically for your daughter, how old is she?
17.
17. So she's almost graduating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
3 more months.
But how do you feel that she's been doing like in high school? Like, do you feel like she's been really accepting of herself?
I think she still like struggles with it.
And
At the age. That's the age she's like struggling with it.
I don't know, because my brother is 10 years old and he's starting struggling with that too. He's like, am I Brazilian or am I American? And my dad's like, you're Brazilian.
Anyways, I told her to say that she's 100% Puerto Rican and 100% American because she's here and she's
yeah. And I mean, and across her path, she's definitely going to come across some people like, oh, you're like, it's like bad to embrace that you're American. It's as if like to be American, it's, you know, now it's like, just like, how do I say this? Like, for example, like I also got my citizenship. So now I'm dual citizen. So I have my Peruvian citizenship and my American citizenship. But again, I feel like there's just an automatic like negative connotation with people trying to embrace being American too, that it comes off in a way like you're attacking an individual. But they also have their own culture.
You need to understand the difference between like ethnicity, like race, nationality.
Yeah.
It took me a very long time to figure out that difference, but I feel like, you know, like your background is, let's say for example, like Puerto Rican, but you grew up, but like what? See, I'm still confused by it. Like your ethnicity would be Puerto Rican, and then you're
No, you can also be Hispanic. also.
Hispanic, sorry, and then
Your nationality will be Puerto Rican, and your race it will either be black, white, Asian, or
what if you grew up in America?
For race, I always put,
nationality.
That's always
for
hard.
race, I always
Yeah.
put this doesn't exist. You do a very anthropologist by
Not to
all
answer.
fields that you can think of, and then I say ethnicity.
I noticed that there are some like surveys or like things that I'll like fill out or applications and it'll have like the stereotypical thing where it's like
Exactly.
white, Asian American,
Yeah.
Hispanic, and then below it'll have like
The ethnicity.
specific stuff and it's
Uh-huh.
like and sometimes
Did
you
you
not
not
just ask me this?
Yeah,
How
right.
weird.
It's like, aren't we trying to stop this? But they use those for, for funding of different things. So it's like you have to do it because of the funding, but then at the same time, it
You have
seems
to put it
racist
in a
to
box.
be-
But
That's the thing.
it's crazy because there's like no training for it. So you have a high school student who's completing, like for example, the Common App, and they need to check off like what race they belong to, and it's like asking them like that question, and they feel like so like baffled.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
you're asking them like a really complicated like math question, like, but what do you mean? And you look at their skin color, and I was like, well, how do you identify as? And it's so hard, especially coming from like a Puerto Rican background, because you got Latinos, you got black, you got white.
Yeah.
So it's like they're not sure what to put. So like they're like, oh, I'm white, and like at that point, it's like you can't. For me, in my opinion, I don't want to say a comment because I don't want to say like, why do you feel that way, or question who they are. So I was like, no. I was like, select what option you identify as, and then I just keep it going. And I was like, if you prefer not to answer, that's fine too. But I feel that for me to question, like, even if they're like darker than me, but they still call white, for me to question that, I think it's just like opening a whole can of worms for them.
Right, because racism is embedded in Puerto Rico. There are still people that will say if your baby is born white, oh, es blanquito,
But race is
Um,
not about color though. That's the thing
It's-
that people don't.
It's not just race, it's like colorism,
Color, the type of hair you have. I have a good friend who also who was here. She did a project on what's pelo malo, bad hair, and it was like how the curly hair is considered like black, like rebellious hair that you can't control, and like how the European culture of having the straight hair is like the ideal type, fair skin, light skin. So I think it was very cool. My friend actually did that research project for that.
That is cool.
Yeah.
Because, like, in Brazil, I mean, I don't remember filling forms where, like, I have to describe my race and where I'm from, because I'm from Brazil, so there's not, like, of course, there's diversity, like, people from other countries, foreign. We call them gringos, but I learned that here, gringos is a bad word, like, you're offending people. But anyways, so, like, those little boxes, I don't remember having to fill them out. So when we come here and then boom, like when my mom had to enroll me to school, like she had to answer that. She's like, I don't know, like what am I supposed to put? Then always put other, or and then like Latino and put like Brazilian and all that, but they never like the concept of race because it's not their skin color. So it's kind of like it's hard to understand. And a lot of people will say, oh, but I'm not white, I'm not American. And yeah, it's just like a whole.
There's no clear way to answer, and it's not like we ever got any training on that either.
Absolutely.
So what is it?
In high school, I didn't understand the difference at the time between Hispanic and Latino. When I was in high school, I did not understand that difference because it wasn't explained to me until I got into high school and I started like asking, like seeing it on application where it's like Hispanic/Latino. I'm like, oh, what's the difference between those two things? It's Spanish, it's the same thing, but there is a difference, and I didn't know that until like way later.
There are a lot of people that still don't know. Like I had to explain people here in college about the difference between Hispanic and Latino because I'm Latino, but I'm not Hispanic.
Yeah, I didn't know that until college. Even though I grew up in New Bern and went to all New Bern schools, so I grew up with like that diversity, but I still didn't know like how it's wrong to call, let's say, someone from Mexico. You wouldn't call them Spanish. I didn't, you know what I mean? So that they're Hispanic even though they speak Spanish. So that's like a major difference. And now I'm like seeing it like I correct like my parents now if they call someone Spanish when they're not Spanish. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
again, you didn't learn that in school.
Yeah.
You just picked this up from other
Yeah.
people within like the culture that would like correct me, and then I'm like, oh wow.
So for example, like over in November, I took in my cousin. So my cousin, he's 18 years old now. He didn't finish high school, but I put certain rules before he could move in.
Oh.
And one of the couple of things was I wanted him to further his education and actually finish high school, or at least get his GED. Two, I wanted him to get a job too, because I wanted to prepare him for adulthood. So now that he's been at home, it's I kind of treat him like a little guinea pig because of the fact that what I'm learning at school, I'm also trying to like reinforce and apply to him. So one of the theories that I feel really close with how I relate to people is the person-centered theory, where we basically actively listen to people as they're actually speaking, don't judge as we're listening, and express empathy. So for me personally, I like that theory. I think it's the most relatable one, the most humanistic approach, especially for high school students or just young adults. And so for him, when he moved in, he was one of the people in my family who would just call everyone Chino or would call, So I would that's where we had conversations. And now we're at this point, and when he's been already living with us for a couple months now, where now he knows the difference. And when he does say it, if it slips out, like he corrects himself.
Oh,
So it's like, I'm doing good. I'm doing something. At least it's just one person. I'm making some sort of a difference there. But like, he's in such even though he's 18 and yes, it's an adult, but I feel like he's in such an impressionable stage of his life that he listens. He actually, we can sit down, have conversations, and talk about how we think certain ways in our family is right and what isn't right. And he's okay. He's willing to listen. And yes, he could easily shut me down and say, I don't want to talk about it. Who cares or whatever, but he actually genuinely listens. And I think that's where I think the opportunity to try to give, especially during that time window where he's willing to listen.
It's because you also listen to, I think, a lot of young adults, teenagers struggle with that. They never feel heard and not able to express themselves. Because if they express themselves to their families, and the families take it as, oh, they're talking back.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not talking back. They're just trying to. They're people. You're just trying to explain themselves. So.
I like that too. Person-centered, is that what it's called?
And there's a couple other theories that I like as well as setting goals when it comes to students too, because yes, as much as you want to use that approach for as much as you can, at the same time, students are at that age where they're if they can push up something as far away as they can without being held accountable, then they definitely will push the buttons and apply on the last day that the deadline is due or something. So I think also a little bit of that in combination with setting goals for the students is also a good approach too. So I like learning about that and actually applying it. I think so far those are the two that I'm trying to stick. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, when were you born here or?
Yeah, I was born in Peru.
Yeah, and when did you come here?
2001, after 9/11.
How old were you? 8?
Mm-hmm.
I came here in 2003.
Back then.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel that you encountered any self-identity?
Yeah, basically
Right.
when I was ending elementary and going to middle school.
Mm-hmm.
That area.
Because I feel like with other Hispanic students that I brought it up with, when I mentioned the self-identity, they look at me like I'm a little embarrassed or if I was shameful of my ethnicity. They couldn't seem to fathom that it was normal for me to have that self-identity crisis. And it's I just wasn't good enough or I didn't embrace our culture enough.
Okay. Like that.
I used to feel when I would go to Puerto Rico, I felt like I couldn't speak Spanish well enough, and then when I was here, I felt like I couldn't speak English well enough. You could hear my accent, and I would forget words in Spanish here, and I would forget words in English. It was just like we're always like having that identity crisis. You know. But I at least learn now that it is something that happens to a lot of us.
And I think at that moment, I didn't think it was as common, so I felt very secluded, and I didn't necessarily speak up. And my family, they like to poke and make fun, so they weren't necessarily someone I opened up with. And I can be a sensitive person when it comes to topics, especially with family. Like I value their opinion so much. But like if they say something wrong or I feel like criticized by them, those words hurt me to like you can't know more. And like if I cry and I end up being a crybaby in there, to them it's like I'm too sensitive or I'm too weak or
That's what my mom always called me.
Yeah.
Dramática.
So,
But I think, I don't know, because as you grow up here in the United States, you start learning things. Because back in middle school, I used to be very ashamed, not ashamed, but like being Brazilian and all of my classmates, I was the only Brazilian in school. And that's how I learned Spanish. And I was always trying to hide that. And then going to high school, same thing, struggling with that. But then I get here in college, and there are times that like when I'm surrounded by people that don't look like me, I'm like, oh, nah, that's not for me. But then I get here, and that's why like I really love working here, is because of all my coworkers that now are friends, like they are so different, and they are like they accept who they are, and they accept me who I am, and it's just like we have talked, and like most of them also face their identity crisis and all that, and they are not scared of sharing that. I think because it feels like a safe place. Everyone like look like me, so I feel like they can talk about the same things. They relate to the same things. But like right now, I'm very proud of who I am, and I don't try to hide. Oh, I'm Brazilian. I speak Portuguese. No, it's I don't know. It's like as you grow, you start like appreciating you for who you are, and then but then like going back home, I came here. I was 13, so sometimes I forget things in Portuguese, and then I switch to Spanish. If I forget in Spanish, I switch to English. And my mom and my dad always say like, "You're Brazilian. Why you forget your own language?" Like they get really really mad, and sometimes I think because I was young, and I'm growing up with this new environment, this new culture, and in my parents' eyes, in even most Brazilians, they see it as like I'm rejecting my Brazilian side and I want to be more American. But it's not. It's like when I sit here and talk to my friends, and they're like, "No, that's good. Like you're learning, you're accepting yourself." So it's kind of like it's a whole like a conflict.
Double-edged sword.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's
No, it makes sense. Yeah.
you can't please like everyone. It's hard like growing up here because you're pulled in all sorts of directions, not just American. Like if you grow up with other um, like Hispanic cultures or whatever, like you said, you switch from like Portuguese to Spanish, whatever. Like it's very difficult. And if you don't have like a very like you're not always in your house with your parents, like you are mostly like in school or work, so it's very easy to be pulled in these different directions, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but as long as you try your best to stick to your roots when you're older and appreciate your culture, that's really like all you can do. I met this Brazilian girl through like a mutual friend months ago, and I didn't know she was Brazilian, but she had an accent, so I didn't point out her accent. I just asked her where she's from. Like I didn't know her, I was getting to know her, and she was like, "Oh, it's in my accent. Like I'm from Brazil." I was like, "Oh, cool." And she was like, "Yeah, like sometimes I try to like cover my accent," and she's like my age. I was like, "Girl, no, don't do that." So I just remembered that, but I don't know.
I think that's like really cool too, because I don't know if you guys remember Jose Feliciano. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah.
And he came here, and there's one thing that he said that in the end he was like, I like kind of like among the line about like I'm Puerto Rican and I'm this and I'm also just like the and like
Yeah.
he was accepting all his
Yeah.
identities.
Yeah.
And that was so cool because I never thought, okay, I'm Brazilian, but I'm living here, so I'm learning about the American culture and I'm learning about the Hispanic culture, so I can be this, and this, embrace, that's who I am. Because growing up here, you kind of get a little bit of every culture.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of people complain about American and all that, but I feel like that's the beauty of being here in the United States and being able to get to know people and learn from people. Like, I don't know, it's like mind blowing.
I feel like if we can point out the similarities and use that to our advantage, it'll definitely be a lot more beneficial. Rather than keep pointing like the difference between everyone. But to your point, I think you mentioned it before, how like as we get older, you grow and you appreciate more. And now I can honestly say that I'm in that part of my life where I'm fully accepting of myself and to where I am, and I'm proud and can acknowledge the work that I've made.
Was there something in college specifically that helped you embrace that? You know, was it your first year, your second year?
Mentors.
Mentors.
They saw something in me that I didn't necessarily see myself. And so to, even if I didn't see that I had that potential, just because I didn't want to let them down, I continued to try to achieve what I thought they wanted out of me. And I think slowly just doing that and just continuing to do that for all the mentors that I've encountered has just given me the opportunity to prove that I can actually do all those things if I just saw what they saw in me. And that's why with the students, the advice I give to them now is try to find as many mentors as you can and actually learn from them and be careful with relationships that you encounter, because you don't know if you can cross paths with them again in the future. And just having those people encourage you and someone that you can lean on, it definitely can shape your life without you even realizing it.
Who were some of your mentors? Yeah.
Dr. Mahoney was one of them.
Asking.
Dr. Mahoney was one of them, and she's someone that I really stuck by with for my 4 years while I was here.
And Kimberly Calderón, let me just say that, right, your interest and intelligence and dedication just shone like in class. I mean, it just beamed out of you. Okay. So it was impossible not to see. You might not have seen it, but standing in the front of the room, like, just like she is right now. That's what she was like in class. Smart, engaged, paying attention, not shy, but also sort of self-deprecating, right? Not egotistical, and really smart and curious. I've told you the story, right? So I'm teaching History 281. She's in the class. And we got to the part on the pre-Columbian Andes, right? Peru and Ecuador. And I showed a little clip that I often show from an exhibit that was at the National Museum of the American Indian at the Smithsonian on the Inca Road. Okay. Well, the next thing I know, Kim and another student in class have gotten in a car and driven to Washington, D.C. for Columbus Day weekend to go see it. Now, most of us can't get CCSU students to walk across the street for a museum exhibit, okay? And she got in a car. She didn't have any money, but she worked for a hotel chain and you got a discount, right? Or something in Washington, drove to Washington and went to the museum exhibit and then came back and was like, it was amazing. So I don't know how you're supposed to ignore that when a student does that in your class, because it's so unusual here for a whole variety of reasons. Students have to work. Students have intense lives. They often want to know exactly what they have to do well in the class and nothing else. It's like, if it's not required, like, I have enough on my plate. I'm not going to do it. Right. And so when somebody kind of picks up and like goes to see a museum exhibit and comes back all enthusiastic, like, I don't know how you're not supposed to notice. Yeah. So Kim, I'm sorry, but it was obvious. All right.
You, it might have been. To me, I don't know. Still finding myself.
Yeah, well, and I've been listening to you all talk about the challenges of growing up as the children of immigrants or migrants here in Connecticut. And it's been really moving, all right? But I also want to suggest something to you to maybe make this a little bit easier. And that is that we are all products of the place and the time in which we grow up. None of us can have the experience that our parents or other relatives who grew up in another country and only lived in that other country, and regardless of where it is, until they're in their 30s or 40s. It's impossible because we grew up here. If you grew up in Spain, it would be the same. If you grew up in Portugal, it would be the same. If you grow up and go to school, right, and have a friendship circle that's international, right, which many of you have, this is a big benefit to you in a globalized world, first of all. But it's impossible for us to have the experiences that our parents did. And this upsets them. I remember when my ex-husband got very, very, very upset because my stepson came home from, his son came home from school speaking Spanish with a Mexican accent. And they were Nicaraguan. You would think that the world had ended. Okay? In Guatemala the other day, somebody said I sounded Dominican. And I was like, what? I don't think so. And he's like, well, you've been spending time in the Caribbean. I'm like, what? I'm like, okay, whatever, And because of the multicultural way you've grown up here, you're going to be different from your elders' generation. And that's going to be hard for them because many families they move not only to the United States, but in a variety of places in order to provide better, among other reasons, to provide better opportunities for their children. And then their children grow up with a different culture. That would happen even if you were in Peru, Puerto Rico, whatever, because technology has changed culture everywhere. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, how many of your grandparents know how to use TikTok? Yeah. All right. TikTok, play video games. I've never voluntarily played a video game in my life. All right. Because I'm too old. Because they didn't get, I was already out of college when video games started getting invented. So I didn't have that experience as a child. Right. And there's a lot of difference. So not that you really want to, but I guess I just want to reiterate that I'm honored that you feel comfortable enough to share this kind of thing in the center. Okay. But also cut yourselves a break. You're all really talented, smart, hardworking young people. You've got a long way to go, and accepting that you have done something that isn't easy, which is have your feet in more than one culture. Yeah. And that's a good thing. Yeah. Like it's a really good thing. And Kim, so Kim and Katie are in similar grad programs. Yeah. Aren't you? Yeah. So Katie's here, Kim's at UConn, but the programs are pretty much yeah. They're both in school counseling. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there you go. Anyway, I have to go to another meeting now, and then I have class, but thank you for sharing, okay? And I will see you mañana, or amanhã. Yeah, Dona Belly?
Yeah.
A senhora está aí? All right, goodbye, everybody. I'll see you later.
You know what's fun? Honestly, when I was here in my undergrad, I had, like, my friends were a Mexican, a Peruvian, and a Colombian. And people would tell me they couldn't tell where I was from because I would try to avoid certain words because I didn't want to say certain, like, mosquito in one of the, it's like a bad word. To me, it's a bad, I mean, to them, it's a bad word, but to me, mosquito, the way we say it, is that it's different. Anyways, so we are influenced by the other people that are around us, and like with the words that we choose. Like her son came home speaking with some Mexican words. That happens.
Oh, it definitely does, especially now that we're in an environment where we're going to encounter people with so many different like backgrounds and diversity. So common. I think it's very cool that you're in.
Yeah, I'm also doing school counseling, but I want to get my LPC too. So I think I'm going to try to do an internship this summer and then next summer. So when I graduate next May, next summer, I'll have both.
Awesome. Actually, my professor was talking to me about the LPC program too that they're going to be starting at UConn.
Okay.
But so there's so many changes going on in my life though that I don't know if like it would be the appropriate time for me to start it this semester.
Yeah.
What program are you in versus the LPC?
Oh, so I'm doing the school counseling program at UConn.
The school counseling, but then the LPC is more for like if you're gonna have an office at home kind of thing.
If you're gonna do like your private,
your own business
counseling for people, so you would encounter a lot more rather than like school-based problems that you may encounter, or you can encounter a lot more from drug addiction, like mental health. So just being okay and you know that you're gonna work in that environment with many different diagnoses.
Yeah, or like if you work at inpatient or like outpatient programs, I can't do that with just my school counselor license. I would need my LPC. But at Central, like all the classes that you take are like mental health counselor classes, so you don't have to take any more classes. You just have to do 2 extra internships.
Oh, that's good. And then you get your LPC is what doing?
Yeah. I hope so.
Not just yet, but
Yeah.
there's so many people in need of that help, especially after COVID.
They've definitely been drawn out, and either the people who've been sticking it out for X amount of years are now like burnt out.
Yeah.
So we need new people.
Yeah.
So what are you gonna do to take care of yourselves? Get so many.
Family, that's just they could be my headache, but they can also be the place that I run to if I have too much stress somewhere else. So like at home, like with my husband, with my animals. I have 2 dogs and a cat, so just being at home, having like my own little sanctuary with them, that's what gives me sanity. Yeah, because otherwise, without that, then I'd be like stressed out, hair falling out, I'd be a mess.
We have some questions. Maybe we just have time for one because it's already late. Let's see. This one that's good. How do you balance life and work? Do you do both?
Oh, so I actually owe this to my former job. I used to work for an insurance company, and I was a case manager, so I was managing all the claims and processes. And once you're in that particular role, you're like this like robot that you're just going and going and going because what drives like the good work ethic is the fact that you have numbers and the turnaround time and that you're just producing and producing. So I think from that particular job, I learned from a friend that once you turn off the computer, that's it. You don't owe the company anything. Like they're paying you for the time that you're on, and other than that, like, why kill yourself over a job that they can easily like replace you? So I think dominating that area, that like, yeah, once my computer is done, like I'm done, I'm clocked out, I'll go do my own thing, and the problems and the cases are still going to stay there regardless. So I think just creating that mental switch in your mind.
Yeah.
And then just kind of like from now on, like I'm definitely going to be applying that same logic to like any other job that I go to, because yes, like granted it's 30 minutes for like, a lunch break at a school scenario, but those 30 minutes can really provide you sanity. And I think it's so easily overlooked because educators are so overworked and that they're so stressed out and they want to do as much as they can for everyone, but at the same time, if you're not at your best capabilities, at your best mental health, like how can you do the same and provide the best for others?
And I'm sure you can notice, once you take those 30 minutes and come back, you're like a homeless person ready to
Oh, for sure.
to get back to,
I can either watch a show or listen to music or eat food within those 30 minutes, and I can just recharge myself. I'm fine.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good thing, a good advice.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Thank you for
Thank you.
joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
We have a poster to sign, and we're gonna give it to you. You can hand it in your office.
Yeah.